Welcome to the Simpleton Podcast, the podcast with the most exalted listening audience in this world or the next.
What an honor.
And if this is your first time listening to the Simpleton Podcast, congratulations, because you're joining a very elite group. So, Laura, your husband had an idea for a new Simple House t-shirt. What do you got there, Laura?
This is going to really get everyone. Love is a harsh and dreadful thing.
Did he make that up?
No, he did not. That's from Dostoevsky. It's from Brothers K, where he describes love, like real love, love in action as a harsh and dreadful thing. And because we kind of like to be downers, this is very great for a simple house.
We like to be downers, but we also like to think of ourselves as kind of badasses. So, yeah. And so this is the type of t-shirt we want to wear, but no, but I thought this was really interesting when you texted me that quote, because it's kind of an interpretive key of so many things, right? Mm-hmm. Like this idea we've talked about of like Adam and Eve hiding in the garden, running away from God. They're running away from the harsh and dreadful thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's also don't look on the face of God. You can't look on the face of God and live. Same idea is that you can't deal with that harsh and dreadful thing, you know? And I think what's also interesting about it is that given that the love of God, the true love, is such a harsh and dreadful thing, and yet an awesome thing in so many ways. It is the thing worth living for. I don't want anybody to get confused about that, but it kind of explains the idea of purgatory. It's like God's justice, God's even his in a sense revenge is not different than his love.
Yeah. The
love itself is as if a vengeful justice, because it is such a rough thing sometimes.
Yeah, it's it's a fire.
Yeah. St. Alphonsus, the namesake of Simple House, when he had an enemy, he would pray, "May God make him a saint." Which, understood in one light, sounds like very nice little pious prayer. In another light, it's you are really wishing a lot on that person.
Yeah.
You know,
that
particularly
they go through the meat grinder. Yeah. Yeah,
particularly if they're on the wrong way in life, you're really wishing upon them for God to really do the number on them.
Yeah.
Which will be for their redemption.
We had, didn't we? We had this guy that did some work on the T Street house.
Right.
I'm blinking.
Yeah, and I don't know his name, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, but he was great. He was an older guy, and he had this kind of great Christianity ruined his life, you know.
Right. So this was an enormous man, and he was Protestant. He found somehow we got connected quite randomly, and he was helping us with some projects on T Street. And
enormous, but out, like a strong looking man, like a manly.
Well, yeah.
Man
the
longer
we the longer we talked to him, we found out he'd been a heavyweight boxer, you know, and he was a big kind of white guy. And I asked him if he wanted to start talking to some of the young men we work with, because I thought they'd find it really interesting to see this great Christian boxer who's such a humble worker. Mm-hmm. And he goes, "No, I don't want to talk to them because everyone acts like Jesus solves all your problems. And really all my problems began with Jesus." So he couldn't quite find the gospel message, I guess, to proclaim there. But yeah.
Yeah. I think, though, there's a thing a lot of Simple House volunteers have experienced this when it's you try to describe what you're doing and people will say "Oh, that must be so fulfilling." And it's a very frustrating thing to try to respond to, because it's yeah, it is, I guess. But really, I'm trying to work out this big thing with God that is just a burden and a nuisance sometimes, you know. I don't know. I hate, nuisance isn't a strong enough word, but it's you're trying to work out this thing with God, and you feel like God is asking you to do this thing that is hard and wonderful and all these things. And it's when someone's "Oh, that must be so fulfilling," you're ah. And I don't know that all our volunteers feel that way, but yeah,
I feel if you talk to a marathon runner and they're not running marathons, you say, "Well, do you really enjoy running marathons?" They'd be like, "Yes." And then if you get them in mile 20 and be like, "You must be enjoying yourself so much."
Yeah. Go away.
They're go away.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is interesting because I think there's this kind of simple idea of Christianity where it's like, and you follow God and then you get like birthday cakes and nice things. And then if you don't follow God, you get like the fires of hell and these punishments and a few whippings. And that's just how it is, you know?
Yeah.
Or it's like, actually, it's all love. And sometimes the love's just very difficult. Yeah. You know, but there is this like, and the rewards you're going to get isn't going to be like a simple reward, like a birthday cake. It's going to be like something very fulfilling, but very overpowering, but very, you know, like.
I think one of the things like in our training, and especially in our training with seminarians, it's like we want like our volunteers to be able to say like, what is the good news? You know, why am I coming here to ruin your life and ask you to live a moral life and ask you to live an upright life, you know, that's going to cramp your style a little bit. And like, what really is the good news? And like, why really are you here? You know, what makes all of this worth it? You know,
we're kind of stumbling at the point where words fail.
Yeah.
So this is like part of where the whole mining of the spiritual life happens. Can't quite be said out loud sometimes, you know?
Yeah.
Let's kind of talk about what the main topic for this podcast will be. All right, we're going to talk about the apparent comeback of the classic retreat. We're going to talk about retreat workshops that we've been doing here at Simple House. We'll talk about the rules of the Simple House Silent Retreat coming up in February and outline the workshop on St. Paul we're going to try to do. Mm-hmm. Then something very terrible happened in Washington, D.C. We'll summarize it. We'll talk about that. Let's talk about the classic retreat making a comeback. All right. I think that there's like a distinction between retreats, and I don't hear other people make this distinction so much, but to me, it's fairly obvious. There's kind of like this way of having a led retreat where they're actually bringing you through a certain like emotional or spiritual exercise, usually as a group. You know, the most obvious place they do this is like youth retreats. Mm-hmm. There's like a crescendo moment. There's all these other moments involved, right? And oftentimes these retreats have secrets.
It's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine that some of them feel less like an encounter with God and more of like a formula that's kind of a manipulation to get you, you know, on this like emotionally vulnerable state to like hit ya.
And yet they seem to do good work. Like, I mean, like there's like like I personally am not a good, I don't like these things, you know, I don't like the amount of like power it gives the retreat director, I suppose. But at the same time, they seem to have good effect. In another way, the Ignatian retreat, which is kind of in many people's minds, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's the pinnacle of retreats, is also a retreat that says imaginatively project yourself into these situations, put yourself in Christ's place, right? It is a retreat also based on an emotional like experience, right? It's not quite as the way we do these like kind of retreats today where there's like the day where the big revelation happens that's very powerful, you know. It's not quite like that, but it's still along this line of like having an emotional aspect to the retreat. It's not just you and God, and it's not just like a heady thing, you know?
Yeah.
I like, though, this idea of this classic retreat of like you just go to the desert, you sit in a cell and you pray with your Bible, you know?
Yeah.
And I think there's a little comeback happening. And I say that because what I also like about the classic retreat is how like democratic it is. It's like, oh, it doesn't matter how smart you are. You know, here's, you know, some spiritual food, usually just scripture. Go mine it, go pray with it, and you can have the greatest revelation from God, you know?
Yeah, I think the danger maybe in like the youth retreat model or whatever is that you're really responding to like an emotional tugging on the heartstrings from this like story that is like not the gospel or not God or whatever. And it there's like a thing where it's like, okay, how can we find the retreat leaders with the biggest sob story, you know, that'll really like get people. And yeah, I think it's like these retreats can be very powerful, and there's also like a prideful temptation in them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's a sense in which there's like this like cathartic thing of like sharing these emotional traumas, you know, and I don't know that that's bad. I just know that's not the classic retreat. And it's not my favorite thing to go to.
Well, I think that there's a way that it can go wrong when you have people competing for the most sinful past life that they, turned away from, or the most traumatic thing that happened in their childhood or whatever. And
right. There's actually a documentary series about this youth group that they would start making up new things that happened to them in order to have a better story to tell the youth group. And to be a more powerful witness, they were like making up traumas that hadn't actually happened.
Oh, okay. There's, I feel like I've seen a few comedic sketches, and there's one in particular that's really good where it's like, oh, I was such a sinner. I used to pull in so many girls. My life was horrible. It's like this long humble brag,
we're over. This is like the segment of the podcast where we talk bad about good things. Yeah. But that's like true, but the other aspect of it that's also true is even when you don't have that type of sharing, there's still this kind of like manufactured way of like, it's almost like liturgical. Like we have liturgy to like kind of create certain reverence ideas during the mass and kind of shepherd the congregation along, this path with this type of music and the actions and the words. Right. And you can do that over 3 days and be a retreat, or you can like abandon people to go have to face God.
Yeah.
And I just prefer that second type. Although I've seen great fruit from the first type.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a comeback in these classic retreats because there's a retreat center around here that's up north of town that's like getting quite popular and completely sold out, hard to get into. And it appears what they're doing is silent retreats, and there's a priest I know up here at Conception Abbey who's trying to start up Lectio Divina retreats, which I think is also kind of this classic nature. He just wants to do Lectio Divina silent retreats. That's all he wants to do.
Yeah.
And, I love this. I think this is great to have a comeback in this.
Yeah, I think the Madonna House model, I feel like I'm meeting more people that know about Madonna House and like this type of retreat of, just go into a room with water and bread and the Bible for 24 hours. Yeah.
The Postinia. All right. Well, Simple House has a little variation on the classic retreat, for good or bad, called We Do Workshops sometimes. And the first workshop we did was like 2009. And the idea was we assigned everyone a gospel to read. There were about 10 people on retreat, so multiple people read the same gospel. And we asked the question, how did Christ do ministry? And that was like, you're kind of like read this gospel with a particular eye towards like, if Christ is God, if Christ is the perfect minister, perfect missionary, how did he do it? And then we ended up meeting as a group and discussing it. And in that discussion, what we would do is we started breaking it down to like, all right, here's when he's talking to the poor. Here's where he's talking to Pharisees. Here's where he's talking to Sadducees. Here's where he's talking to Romans or non-Jews, and in each case, like, how did he do ministry? Was he rude? Because Christ is rude. Christ is not a great guest sometimes. Or like, what was his like MO on all these things? Right. And then try to see if we can come out with ideas that might lead to us becoming better missionaries,
Yeah. And one thing that's been like important in our retreats, and I think, this is in large part thanks to Father Adam, is like Catholics getting over the idea of like, you could just read the gospel today, like the whole entire gospel of Mark you can read in the next hour right now,
And I think Catholics need that more than anyone because we keep getting our readings in these like
snippets,
like cutout forms, and we don't necessarily ever get a good context of how they all like lead from one to the other, which reminds me of like when you've been in DC a while using the metro and then you get like a car. Because like sometimes you'll wander away from the metro station doing whatever you're doing, shopping or visiting or going to a coffee house, and then you'll walk all the way back. And sometimes you were actually closer to another metro station, But you don't realize that because you think of DC as like these islands. Like you pop out here and then there's a 3-4 block radius you visit and then you go back down the hole, you know?
Yeah.
And then you start driving. You're like, oh, this is all just right in a line. Or like, I could have totally gone here, you know? Or, and that's what you need to do with the Gospels, because as Catholics, we sometimes like don't get that type of like connective tissue in the Gospel. Christianity is unique amongst the world religions in its complete like openness to rationality and philosophy, which allows within Christianity like a complexity of theology and like academic pursuit that's just like not really in these other religions. But Christianity also is incredibly democratic. There are no secret teachings. Everything is readily available to everyone, and everyone has direct recourse to God. You know, almost as if without an intermediary. I mean, the intermediary is God himself. You know, it's Jesus and the Holy Spirit. And it's like through this process, you can have someone who, you know, isn't educated or you don't even think is very smart, who can like go and come back with the most amazing insights about God.
Well, it's interesting because you can have a St. Paul who's literally trying to, kill Christians and then is like preaching a few days later and is a great authority, you know? And so it's like, it's not like a thing like the new guy has to climb the ranks or something like that, you know? And I think it's also foundational to our ministry. Like, it's why we think that we can have, some like 22-year-olds like praying and reading the Bible on their own and going to minister to people older than them. And it's also why we think that a poor woman who can't read in the hood might have a word for those same volunteers.
Right. Yeah. It very much opens this kind of like two-way street. And that has not been, I mean, there are many religions where that's not the way it works. Like there are the like experts and the not experts, you know, and you just are lucky to sit at the feet of the experts.
Yeah.
Right. So Christianity is not that. And we should not desire to make it into that through gatekeeping and all these other things. Having said that, it has struck me how much philosophy and theology we want priests to know, you know. That like we do know that the core of the religion is openly available to like someone having a mystical experience and being a truly great Christian. But we don't really let people be priests unless they do complete all the philosophy and theology. And I think probably 99% of the time that's the right idea. I'd be open that there's exceptions to that, but yeah, it is valuable.
Yeah, but I think we also like if you read the catechism, it's like the normal person can have like a mystical experience, you know, or
well, the normal Christian can be the greatest Christian alive.
Yeah.
Like the uneducated Christian could be the greatest saint, far better than your parish priest. But we don't ordain those people. Yeah. We do want the priest to know some theology and philosophy, which I think 99% of the time is probably a great idea.
Yes. Yeah.
It's kind of like the greatest poet can be a simpleton. Mystical. Yeah. It can be someone who just with zero, you know, academic chops. Yeah. So. All right. Yeah. Okay. Shall we talk about the rules of the Simple House Retreat? Sure. All right. You're all invited to do one of these if you want. If you really want to come on our retreat, contact us. We'll see if we can fit you in. Not this year, though. Rules of retreat. We start with real basic rules of silence. You are allowed to talk at conferences or like a workshop we're doing, and you're allowed to talk at dinner. You know, and the rest of the day is supposed to be silent. We have some families that come on retreat. They don't have the same rules. Typically, if a married person can get even 3 hours of like pretty good silence, you're doing pretty good if you got a bunch of kids. Yeah. But that's the first rule. The second rule is dietary. It's no meat, no fish, no sugar, no snacking. You know, we also challenge people to experiment with fasting a little bit, never more than, you know, about a 9-hour fast, meaning like eat by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But there's ways that you can kind of mess up and waste a retreat if you don't physiologically, you know, just do enough controls, you know? Yeah. So that's what we're kind of doing with these diet rules. Do you have any thoughts on that, Laura?
Yeah, well, I wanted to describe a little bit more the setting. So it's like we normally go on retreat at Conception Abbey in the winter. And I'm saying I'm not going this year and haven't been the last few years, but it's like freezing cold. Like it might be like 6 degrees. There might be a lot of snow on the ground and everything is like very quiet and asleep there, except for like the seminarians running back and forth between classes. And so there's kind of like these dorm rooms and there's the seminary and then it's a Benedictine monastery. So there's kind of like a classic Benedictine church, and connected to the church is the cloister and the library. People are kind of spending their time, back and forth between, the church, joining the monks in prayer, back to the dorm, maybe they'll spend some time in the library, back to the church for some quiet time. But and
you need to have enough, space to go for walks and stuff. And it is possible to do a silent retreat within a city. It's just kind of a weirder context to do it in.
Like it's like you can't do a retreat like this at the beach either. And even Conception Abbey in the summer, it's like it's like teeming with life, and there's just nature everywhere, and birds are sweetly singing in every corner, and it's like a different way to spend time with God and appreciate God and the beauty of God, but it's not like going out into the desert exactly.
Yeah, I think it reminds me like in college that some people really believed in like having class outside. And that's just like not class in my mind.
It's
particularly
like,
if it's like
let's
math
skip class together.
Yeah, do we need just more distractions in class? Is that what we want?
Yeah.
All right. That's the basic rules of retreat. And we're going to go now to the new workshop for this year, which I think is kind of interesting. All right. The goal of this year's retreat is St. Paul's vision for Christianity. And not really Christianity as like a kingdom and a church, but Christianity in the sense of you and your Christian life. Let's talk about St. Paul for a second. He wrote a third of the New Testament. He was a companion to St. Luke, and most of the book of Acts, which is written by St. Luke, is basically a biography of St. Paul. When the ancients talk of church authority, they think in terms of like chairs, meaning like the Pope sits on the chair of Peter. But some of the ancients will refer to Rome as the chair of Peter and Paul, as if Peter and Paul's relationship was that tight. And there's a lot of cathedrals and basilicas in America and in Rome, and probably other places in the world, that are dedicated to Saints Peter and Paul together, and even they share a feast day, the feast day of Saints Peter and Paul. If you Google image like St. Peter and Paul, you're going to get a lot of images of them standing together, holding a church between them. And that could be, in a sense, our church, or it could be a basilica. I'm not sure. But it's just interesting that Paul is so core to the founding of Christianity. But even though he's so great in so many obvious ways, he's very difficult. I'd say he's difficult because he doesn't play nice. He's always pushing and challenging and arguing. He famously corrected St. Peter for basically virtue signaling. When he'd been hanging out with Gentiles, he would eat whatever. And then when the Jews showed up in front of the Gentiles, he started only doing what those kind of like, I don't know if you'd call them like the high church people or the, what would you call them? Like the right wingers?
Yeah, I guess.
I know that's not really quite right. But but basically, St. Peter was caught virtue signaling to people who had more strictures. And St. Paul has to call him out in public for this, right? And not only did he call the first pope out and correct him, he also was correcting churches in these letters. And he had the authority to literally write a letter to a church that became scripture, but also just like very firmly correct them on their way, right? And my question here is it he not just correcting them theologically and not just talking to them about practices, but he seems to be trying to get them to realize their Christian calling and their Christian life, but he never quite exactly tells you what it is. It's as if it's a concrete idea for him, but it's not a concrete idea that he can just like, write in 4 or 5 sentences.
Yeah.
And even, Peter is interesting. In the second letter of Peter, he talks about St. Paul, and he says everything St. Paul's writes is scripture, but it's difficult to understand. And he says, and Paul's words are purposely twisted into the wrong sense by wicked and restless minds. And this is true. I mean, Paul is like, whenever you see like a weird Christian heretic, it's almost always because a tangential interpretation of Paul. But anyway, so what is Paul trying to figure out? And I think that within this there's this basic reality of life that you are limited, that there's only so much energy. There's only so much you can focus on. You can't quite do it all, right? And your Christian life can go very different roads depending upon your focus. Well, so an example of this is like, sometimes you could focus on like striving not to sin and avoiding temptation and fighting temptation. You could focus on building virtue, or focus on worshiping God in a worthy way, or striving to learn all about God and theology, or striving to be free of the world and develop some spiritual or detached attitude. You could focus on doing charitable work for the poor, or focus on never judging anyone at all, or trying to be a balance of all these things in the list, right? And I think it's pretty easy to see how, like, psychologically and in your Christian life, you just end up in a different place depending on if you took any of those things as like your primary goal. Does that sound right to you, Laura?
Yeah.
So the question is, what would St. Paul have you do? You know, what is he trying to get these people to realize so that you're not doing something in a sense unworthy? Like if you took any of the things I just mentioned to the extrema, you would end up kind of in an unworthy Christian life, right? Because somehow they're not the true focus.
Right. It's not right. None of those things are the Christian life. And maybe some of it is like the byproduct of a Christian life or a way to try to express the Christian life, you know, but it's not, you know, the things you described aren't like relationship with Jesus, you know, and yeah, is he trying to paint a picture, give you little anchors, whatever, you know?
And whenever I make a point like this, I always get paused by someone who goes, of course, Clark. Everything in the balance, nothing to the extreme, you know? And it's like, well, that's its own little project, you know, that ends up in a weird place, you know? And I do think that following Christ is extreme.
Right.
So it's not like a balance. It's like a give everything.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, this is all kind of like the mystery of like what we're trying to get at. And the question I want everyone to kind of workshop on retreat is, we're going to divide up the Pauline corpus, like all his writings, and give chunks to each person, and then say, come back and don't tell us the like little theological argument, but almost like read between the lines about what Paul's saying, about what he's what does he hope for these people to be like embodying in Christianity?
Yeah.
I think we all might have an idea in our head what that is. But I'm trying not to ruin the workshop by suggesting a solution, you know, like I'm hoping that everyone kind of like really tackles this with fresh eyes. Yeah. So if you want to do the Simple House Retreat this year, that's your homework.
That's good.
Okay.
I think that will be fruitful and interesting.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
All right. Something happened 2 weeks ago that was very sad that the DC community is still kind of thinking about and dealing with. And we have a lot of listeners who have a tie to this.
Yeah. So we have a lot of ties to the Capuchin friars here, especially in DC. But they are very like special to us. They've been very encouraging friends to us for many years. And I think, you know, we've kind of just thought of them as, you know, brothers, you know, in the mission field, and we've gone to them for spiritual advice and all that. And so we're very close to the Capuchins. And through that, we've gotten to know some of the Cap Corps volunteers over the years. And there's a Cap Corps house in DC. And this year, or a couple weeks ago, 3 of the Cap Corps volunteers were walking home, and a car of people stopped, pulled a gun out, said to give them all their money. And in this, they shot and killed one of the Cap Corps volunteers. So I don't know what else I was going to say about this. This is very sorrowful to us, just for the loss and, for the Capuchins and for the Cap Corps people. And our volunteers didn't know this guy very well. They'd met him a handful of times. It's also, I think, for Clark and I, like, just difficult because we're thinking kind of about the welfare of our volunteers, and hearing about something like this kind of makes you examine everything about, putting young people in the city. And so I guess we want to extend our condolences.
For people who know DC well, this happened in the Brooklyn neighborhood.
Yeah. So it wasn't in a particularly, it was like kind of a nice neighborhood now. It used to not be, but it's
right.
Surprising.
And we want to, and he was coming home from adoration when this happened. Yeah.
I think his family has said, I think his family is very, in the midst of kind of this dark thing, they are consoled that they felt he was really doing something that was making him happy, that he thought he should be doing, that he felt like he was like following what, God kind of wanted him to do.
Well,
so I think
I find the whole thing's upsetting, and I don't find a lot of consolation. And I mean, God bless him.
Yes. I think his family finds some consolation in that, right? But so it's horrible. Yes,
And so our condolences to his family, and also to all the Capuchins and anyone who was involved in any way in this. And and we're not going to talk about it this time. We want to just acknowledge this thing that happened. That's a great tragedy. We had to talk to all our missionaries both about this and also about reiterate kind of rules of safety. And we also, I think it deserves talk about the general state of crime in America right now, and particularly in Washington, D.C., where it's moving kind of worse than almost any other area in America right now.
Yeah.
So we'll do that in a future podcast. Prayers for Ryan Robledo, the Capuchins, and his family. What else do you have, Laura?
We've been praying for everyone involved. Please join us in prayer. Gonna move on to our last thing, which is this. My kids have found this pile of Simple House stickers, which they have been putting everywhere, and it's driving me crazy because I don't know where their little stash is, but I keep finding it on our furniture. But I have one daughter that really likes to just like plow ahead. I think this is like sometimes a virtue and sometimes not, but she's like just gonna go for it, whether she knows what the heck is going on or not. And I think she has reimagined Simple House marketing a little bit. I think she thinks we need a stronger message, and she has created this little flyer with Simple House stickers on it. And it says, "Let's put, in quotes, a simple house in every home. Learn more with Simple House. Christ starts here."
Which sound like if we contacted a marketing firm, you could imagine that coming back.
They would be like, yes.
Right.
It's like nonsense. I think
she might have a feature in this.
I know.
Even though that's not our message. Let's be clear. Let's clear that's not what we're trying to do here.
Started before a Simple House, also everything. But just she really went for it. She went in with a strong messaging.
Great. All right. God bless everybody. Thank you for listening to the Simpleton Podcast. If you find us on YouTube, which is the main way we get new subscribers, we are on all the other audio platforms, so you don't have to stare at our faces. All right. Thank you, Laura Heeman.
Thank you, Clark Massey.
And thank you, Ben, for editing our videos.